having said that, I do want to make it clear because I do feel like it wasn't perfectly clear. My first choice is to sign Bobby Witt to a very long-term contract extension. Um, my point of emphasizing a trade as a possibility last week is because I was skeptical of the idea that the Royals could get him signed to a contract. But the one thing that I don't think I fully took into account, and I'll own up to that now, is the way that the stadium issue scrambles things. Right, and it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, the fact that the Royals are currently trying to get a stadium approved by the public makes it extremely even more unlikely than it would have otherwise been that he gets traded this offseason. Because if there's going to be a ballot proposal sometime between now and next summer on building a $1 or $2 billion stadium for the Kansas City Royals, trading their star young player is probably the absolute worst thing they could do from a PR standpoint, even if it's the best thing for the franchise from a baseball standpoint. So that's the one side of it. So I get it. He probably wasn't going to be traded anyway. He almost certainly won't be traded because of that. But the other side of that is the reason why I was so skeptical that he could sign a long-term contract extension is because if they could sign him to a long-term deal, they would have done it 2 years ago or even 1 year ago, the way that the Mariners did with Julio Rodriguez. And his price has gone up probably 50% to 100% since then. And if they didn't get it done then, why would they get it done now? But I actually
can I object?
Okay.
Like, from this standpoint, like when we have these conversations, we sit here and talk about what should have been done with the value of hindsight. Well, if they had signed,
Well, we were saying it on this show for our very first episode.
No, yeah, okay. We're saying in hindsight, the value of whatever he asked for would have been worth it. But at the time, none of us would have said you should give him what he's asking for. And that's where we sit today. And I will actually tell you, I don't think there's any chance Bobby Witt Jr. signed to a long-term contract. I think the Royals will trade him. I'll stand by what I said last week. I don't think it has to be this offseason. It is possible this will be the best time. This is the time that other teams should go get him. They should want him the most, but they may look at it and go, this is 4 hot months, right? Like Mark Teahan had 4 hot months. Everybody thought he learned to turn on the ball. Bobby Witt Jr. is much better than Mark Teahan. All right, settle down, people. Settle down. I'm not saying, and I love Mark Teahan. Great guy, tremendous.
I'm sure he would tell you he's no Bobby Witt. And that's why we
best.
love Mark Teahan,
Yes,
because he's very self-aware.
Yes, absolutely. It is, but my point here is you have to have a trade partner. Like, and this might be the offseason. Like, I won't tell you it wouldn't happen this offseason because the Yankees need something, right? They're going to go into an offseason. They're going to need something to get their fan base going. And I don't know how much more money they want to get. So how far do they want to go into the luxury tax? The Mets need something. How far do they want to go into the luxury tax? There are a lot of teams that are up there. I think, what are we at? Like 6 or 8 teams that are at around the luxury tax to where, and they're not winning. And so they might have the incentive to, okay, no, normally we just buy the talent, but we need cheap, long haul answers, and we don't want to go into the luxury tax. So I want to be clear. I think it is entirely possible, that it's not, that this, it could happen this offseason. I think it's unlikely because I think the Royals want to try to put it all together with him being a part of it. And I think they want to sign him. But I'm going to tell you, from the people I talked to, the Bobby Witt, there's like we can talk about all the guys that sign, and they generally have one theme in common. They're Latino if they're signing early.
They don't come from money. They didn't get a lot of money signing, their original signing bonus.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. No, there are a lot of reasons. This is why I think ultimately they were unable to get him signed to a long-term deal last year. And, but I do think that there's a difference between he's the potential to be a superstar and he's actually playing like a superstar. Maybe it's only for 2 months or whatever, but like, bird in the hand versus 2 in the bush. Even if his contract expectations now have dramatically increased, I think there's still a conversation to be had here. So before we talk about whether, they should trade him or can they sign him, let's try and figure out what would it take to get him signed. Right. And
By the way, and let me tell people, YouTube is now working. It did not work initially. It is now working for the show. Sorry to interrupt the podcast if it's like 3 days later and you're like, what the hell do I care? Just want to let you know that it is up and running now. I've checked it and it's up and going. But go ahead. I'm sorry, Randy.
Right. So no, I was just going to say, let's try and figure out what exactly a contract would look like. I'll give a shout out to the people at royalsreview.com. Matthew Lamar wrote a nice article today, very conveniently, where he did the homework for us and kind of went through the most comparable contracts, long-term contract extensions to young pre-free agency players in the last few years, to give us an idea of what the market is. Because it's very difficult to figure out what is the market for a guy who is a potential superstar, maybe even emergent superstar, but is still multiple years away from free agency. What really struck me from this list, there's seven players that he identified, but I feel like a couple of them are not really that comparable. Two of them, Giancarlo Stanton, already had 4 years of service time. That doesn't really work. Wander Franco was still in his he had about like 3 months of service time. So again, you're trying to find that guy in that 2-year sweet spot, because that's where we are with Bobby Witt, 4 years away from free agency. Julio Rodriguez is on this list. He actually signed before his rookie season was over. So again, he had 5+ years before free agency. Buster Posey's on the list. That's maybe a good comp. He was 4 years away. But
yeah, except for the difference though is, like on those first year guys, they were excelling defensively and offensively. Bobby Witt Jr. was hanging at 280 something on base percentage, and all of a sudden looked like he hadn't played shortstop in his life. And for an organization that routinely oversold what their players' defensive abilities were. So like, I don't think any of us were like, we all said, listen, he's athletic. We can see that when he runs the bases and when he goes back on a ball, but none of us were like, look out, this guy's going to contend for some of the best defensive numbers that are out there for a shortstop. Nobody was saying that. And why would any other team believe that at that time? So, I mean, I do think that like every one of these contracts are unique, because every player, if they're great, is unique in what they can do. So I don't think there's going to be a direct comp.
Right. No, I agree with that. And here's what's interesting is, like, you and I think, had probably more discussion about trying to get him signed to a long-term deal when we started this podcast, before he'd even made his major league debut, than we were this time last year, or even over the offseason. Like, I actually feel like, precisely because of what you're saying, where his defensive numbers were so abysmal, we didn't know what he was a year ago. We didn't know what he could be. And that uncertainty made figuring out what his value in a long-term contract was after his first year, after his rookie season, made it more difficult. My feeling was, before he started his career, when he was still this lump of clay, but was like one of the 3 best prospects in baseball, and potentially that's the time where you could get a discount. That was the time where I felt like you and I had a lot more conversations about a long-term contract for him. But like you said, the fact that his dad was a major leaguer, he had gotten $7.5 million himself in a signing bonus. Like, he had far less urgency to get signed to a long-term deal. But when I look at these contracts, I mentioned Buster Posey, but Buster Posey was older, and that was like 9 years ago now. But there's one contract on here that I feel like really fits well as a comp, and that's the Fernando Tatis contract. Okay. That was 2 years ago. Fernando Tatis had been in the major leagues. He had exactly 2 years of service time. He was 4 years away from free agency. Now, he was probably a better player. I mean, it's easy to forget now, and we'll have to talk about what's happened to Fernando Tatis over the last 2 years. But at that moment, Fernando Tatis had played, because of the pandemic, and in part because he had missed some time with an injury, he'd only played 143 games in the majors. He only played basically one season's worth of games. But in that one season, he had hit .301 with 39 homers, was worth 7 wins above a replacement. Good defensive shortstop. I would say he had established a level that Bobby Witt still has not established. But and he also the son of a major leaguer. Not, didn't get $7.5 million signing bonus. But probably you weren't getting him at a huge discount, and the Padres probably didn't get him at a discount. They gave him 14 years. Oh, I should also point out, he was about 18 months younger than Bobby Witt is now. So I think that's part of why 14 years. He'll be a free agent when he's 36, I think. So it's still not like old. This isn't like a Miguel Cabrera contract running until he's 40 years old, or Albert Pujols, where you're going to probably have 5 dead years at the end. But 14 years, $341 million, which sounds like an insane amount of money, and it is an insane amount of money, but it's $25 million a year. And I actually think that is not a that is not a bad comp, but also
And that sounds great. Bobby Witt will never sign that deal.
You don't think Bobby Witt would sign for $340 million?
No.
I mean, I feel like there's a difference between what we were talking about 2 years ago. We were talking about 100 million, maybe 150, and I could see a guy walking away from that when he's got 8 million. His dad made about 21 million in his major league career, but $300 million, you think he would walk away from?
And then there is the comp, as you said. Tatis is from the Dominican Republic, but his father was a major leaguer, right. And so, I don't know how well he managed his money, but it would be tough to not be a lot better off than your average Dominican kid who comes over and does not have that kind of money. So it is a fairer comp, more fair, I think would be the better way to say that, comp on Bobby Witt. But I think, listen, you're talking about a guy that was thinking he was going to be the number one pick or was in the running for the number one pick. Why would you give away 7 years of free agency where salaries only go up when you are just hitting your stride? I am telling you, what he is today is what he knew he always is, what he thought he'd be as a rookie. And he now is empowered to think that there's even more there. So why would you give away all that time in free agency? The most important thing for him would be to get the free agency. If he plays it out now, in 4 years, he's a free agent, and he has everybody bidding for him.
Yeah.
And along the way, after he makes a couple of bucks next year, he's going to start making what? 12 and a half, 15. I don't know what the first year.
So, one of the things we look at is
30. I mean, he's going to clear an arbitration.
I'm guessing 60. I'm guessing around 65. Like, one of the things we have to figure out is, okay, if he were to sign a deal, what is he giving up? So the first thing you have to figure out is how much is he going to make over the next 4 years. Next year is, this is why this year is to me, sort of a pivotal year, because next year is the last year where he's not really making any money. He's not arbitration eligible. He will make as close to the major league minimum as the Royals decide. They can literally give him, a $1 raise, whatever they want. Call it $1 million, right? The following year, he's arbitration eligible. And, I mean, this isn't like Brady Singer, okay, well, now you're getting $5 million. No, he's going to get 8 figures easily his first year. The way arbitration works is they look at your performance for the 2 previous years, which benefits him a lot because his rookie season won't count. And all of his advanced metrics, et cetera. If he plays next year just like he does this year, and then there's actually I don't know if they kept it. I assume they've kept it in the new CBA, but there's actually an argument that players can make at arbitration if they have a quote unquote like unique skill set. I remember Ryan Howard using this when he went to arbitration to be the first player to get $10 million in arbitration because he had hit 58 home runs the year before. If you have some sort of unique skill set, unique talent that no one else has, you can ask for an outrageous demand and break all the arbitration records. And this is where I think Bobby Witt's combination of home runs and steals, which we've been tracking and touting, might actually come back to bite the Royals a little bit in terms of he probably will get 15 million and maybe 20. I would say at least 15 million his first year of free agents, first year of arbitration. And then it'll go to 20, 25 probably. So you're talking about at least 60. Let's call it 65 million. All right, but still, even let's say he gets 4 years, over the next 4 years, not counting this year, 4 years, 65 million. If you were to offer him, I actually think instead of 14 years, I think 12 years, because he is older than Tatis, 12 years and 300 or 12 and 320. So you're talking about 26, 27 million a year. So, but let's just do the math. Okay, you can shake your head all you want.
I'm shaking my head because I know these conversations. These are the conversations fans have. This is Mathland. I'm having the conversation that Bobby Witt Sr. is having. I'm having the conversation that agents are having, and I'm having the conversation that a 23-year-old kid that's known he's going to be good his whole life is going to have, and that is on the open market. At 27 years old, Bryce Harper is your comp.
Bryce Harper got 13 years and $330 million. We're offering him more guaranteed
at
now.
27. And when he got out to the market after already making it. So he's going to make this money.
So $330 million plus the 65.
And there's inflation. And they're going to say he steals bases, which Bryce Harper didn't. And he plays shortstop at a premium. So that's the start. Trout is going to be the guy, right? And then they're going to add inflation. That's if he gets to listen, stop playing like he's going to come in here. Take what is the wildest demand you can expect. That's what it's going to be.
Soren, I'm not saying this is what he will sign. I'm saying let's do the math and figure out what is a reasonable contract. Then we can just talk about whether you'll take it. You're probably right. I don't think I wouldn't call it a snowball's chance in hell, but if I were a betting man, I will tell you that on opening day 2029, I guess it will be 2028. If I were a betting man, yes, I would put a heck of a lot of money that Bobby Witt will not be in a Royals uniform. I get that. But let's just do the math. Just figure out what is if you are Bobby Witt's agent, you at least have to present to him, this is the math. This is what you are giving up.
Who's his
you
agent?
Want to do it, fine. Huh?
Who's his agent?
I know his agent is Scott Boras. Yes. Absolutely.
His dad.
And his dad, yeah.
And
his dad made 20.
His dad's hands are all over his business dealings.
But that's fine. Just because his dad's involved doesn't mean his dad allergic to $300+ million contracts? Not necessarily. Let's do the math. Let's say they offered 12 and 320. If you turn that down, you are taking 4 and 65. That's what we've established. He's going to get 4 and 65 from the Royals. So what you are turning down is an extra 8 years for about $255 million, $32 million a year. If he hits the open market in 4 years and he plays and he's healthy and consistent and a 5-win player consistently, will he get more than $32 million a year? Yeah, he will. He'll probably get $35 to $40 million a year. Right? It's hard for me to say too much more than that because that we're already talking record annual average value contract if you get to $40 million a year. So yeah, he would make more money, but we're not talking about 20 million versus 40 million. We're talking about like 32 million versus 40 million. Would you take a 20% discount now to have guaranteed that you don't suffer a career-threatening injury in the next 4 years?
Who was the last baseball player that their career ended early?
Ended early? It's a lot of guys whose careers went south.
Name a guy.
I thought Grady Sizemore was going to be freaking, the next Carlos Beltran. What the hell happened to Grady Sizemore? I still have no idea, but it does happen.
Real quick, I wanted to make sure that I hadn't missed that he had changed agents. Octagon is his agency, and so it's not Scott Boras. But the injuries like that are rare. They're rare. No, that is not what he's.
It's interesting. Look, it's interesting. We discussed Fernando Tatis. Fernando Tatis now. Do you think he regrets that deal? I don't think so because Fernando Tatis just missed a year with injury followed by PED suspension, and his numbers are significantly down this year. Stuff happens, man. Stuff happens to these guys,
and none of them think it's going to be them. And Dad doesn't think it's going to be him.
Maybe not. I'm not saying he will. Look, if you're saying you've talked to you've talked to people in the know and he's not going to. Okay, he's not going to. I'm just saying if I'm his agent, I'm trying to present the options. There is a number. Would you say there is a number? If Steve Cohen suddenly bought the Royals and was throwing around his billions and was like, there's no amount of money I won't spend to make a great baseball team. Would you agree there is some numbers the Royals could throw out there? Okay.
Of course. $100 million a year for 20 years.
I don't think it's going to take a $2 billion contract to get him.
I know. But that's the thing. Don't ask me, is there some number? And
what do you think the number is? I don't think it's $2 billion. Is it $400 million? If they offered him $400 million for 16 years, do you think he would take that?
I think what you have to do is when you get to this point where you're like, okay, what do I have to do that's well beyond the amount that I think he's worth? Why are you offering that?
So you don't think the Royals should offer him a long-term contract?
Well, I think if he'll sign a 20-year deal for $100 million, I'm all in. Okay? There is a point where, yes, you absolutely do it. And there is a point where, no, it's too much. And that's the point. That's what the Royals have to figure out. Not what he will take, Now you're just doing funny money, Steve Cohen money. And that's not how the Royals operate. The more important question is not what will it take to sign him. The most important question is, what is he actually worth to this franchise in this market? And your point about the stadium is very astute. At this time, and the development of this franchise, what is he worth? What's the most important thing? His worth is more now than baseball, because baseball-wise, the numbers it will take to sign him, the Royals should never give him. They should trade him sometime in the next 2 years. That's what should happen. Between now and the offseason, between what would it be, 25 and 6 season. Sometime in the next 2 years, they should trade him, right? That's what should happen. If the demands are if you're going to be that far apart. The question is, can you get a vote done by doing that? And that's a reason to not move him and hold on and wait. Now, if they can get the vote done in April, that means you can go all the way up to next season, and then you could trade him. You can trade him at the trade deadline. You can trade him in the following offseason. But you show me the contract that's been signed by a small market team for a big player, a big money contract that has worked over the long haul. Curtis, we pulled the numbers just off the top of our head, and you probably can. But Joe Mauer, before the Twins signed him to his big contract, Minnesota Twins win percentage was .545. After, .440. Joey Votto with the Cincinnati Reds, before he signed his big contract, their win percentage was .507. After, it was .449. Todd Helton, Rockies are kind of weird. Really didn't matter. .473 before, .468 after, virtually the same. Mike Trout, Angels, big money. Before they signed him, .517. After they signed him, .459. And they added Shohei Ohtani. Okay? But they've never made the right pitching moves to go along with it. So how, if those teams all got definitively worse after signing it, do you see the scenario where you are just going to chase what he wants, chase what Bobby Witt Sr. wants, chase what Octagon, the agency, wants, chase the market, and just do whatever it takes to get him? How do you think you're going to be able to field a competitive team?
Soren, why do you have to be such a bummer? Like, I agree with you. I'm the one who brought this up last week and set off a bunch of very angry Royals fans. I just thought one episode we could give the fans just a reason to dream. And you're like, hell no. I'm going to nip that in the bud right on the show, right here, right now. Yeah, of course. If the Royals give him an irresponsible amount of money, it will be an irresponsible contract. And there have definitely been some irresponsible contracts that have been given over time. Now, some of the players you mentioned, Joe Mauer was a catcher. I'd be very leery of giving any catcher, a long-term deal because of the injuries of that position. And of course, Joe Mauer had a concussion.
Except you quoted Buster Posey's contract.
I mentioned it's just as a benchmark. And actually, that one probably worked out better.
Sure did.
But my point is, but Joe Mauer, I wouldn't like Salvi. 4 years, 5 years. Okay, we're talking about 12. When you start talking 12-year deals, and that's what Joe Mauer's was 10. Joey Votto was a first baseman. You know, an incredible hitter, but as Albert Pujols and Miguel Cabrera have shown, not the best bet. First baseman not the best bet for a long-term contracts because they have to absolutely rake to be valuable. And if they get to 35 and they're just an average hitter, they kind of suck at their position. But look, ultimately, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there is a number that I think would work. I actually do think $25 million a year over the next 12 years, in part because right now the Royals have no payroll. So you could actually front load this thing. And I want to see the Royals make a commitment to payroll to show the city that they're serious about spending money on this team. If the city is going to give them billions of dollars in a new stadium. And the way to do that is to spend that money now, because right now they're not spending. They don't have anybody to spend the money on. I mean, yes, they have Salvador Perez. The guy the number 2 payroll obligation for next year for the Kansas City Royals is Hunter Dozier. All right. Number 3 is Jordan Lyles. And number 4, I believe there is no number 4 because literally there's no one else under guaranteed contract. You have a bunch of arbitration guys, but no one is guaranteed a contract next year. So the Royals could literally give Bobby Witt $30 million next year, and it would work fine for them, right? So they could do it. But what you're telling me is he's going to want $450 million over 10 years, of course. Yeah, no, don't do that. Then you have to trade him. But then you're in an awful bind because you really can't trade him this winter if you want that stadium. But you can't sign him. You can't. So you're gonna. The one thing we know for sure is he's gonna have a great season next year for a team going nowhere. The hope is if you get that stadium approved, like I said, by April, you can be very Machiavellian and then put him out there in July, and the team gets him for 4 postseasons, and he still has that elite Juan Soto-esque value that we talked about last week. But it does feel like the Royals are kind of in a bind if they can't sign him this winter and they can't trade him for stadium related reasons. Well, then I guess we can just enjoy watching a superstar play on a bad team because that's kind of where we are for 2024. The hope is by 2025 you get something fixed.
Yeah, I think and here's the other thing is like, well, they must get this for him. It's not a game you get. That's where to me they really need to get the stadium thing passed so that they can do what's best for the baseball team. Because I'm with you. I'll go back to what you said earlier. I want to watch the 14 and 15 Royals that were completely devoid of a star more than I want to watch Bo Jackson run up and down the wall and gun out Harold Reynolds from left field and not go to the playoffs. Playoff teams are the best ones to watch. And history tells us, Rays, Guardians, Brewers, small market teams without massive, contracts to players. Now the Brewers, I need to look at the Brewers.
The Brewers might be interesting because the Christian Yelich might be another data point for you where, they give him the big deal and then he went from MVP to, the power kind of dissipated and he's just a good player now. Now the Brewers are so well run; they're still going to, they're still, leading that division, I believe, right now. But, they probably they could have done that without giving Christian Yelich a long-term contract. So,
yeah, the Brewers have $125 million payroll, which is not that big considering the Royals.
No, if you had a pennant caliber, playoff caliber team, the Royals can absolutely afford that, and they've done it before.
Yelich is making $26 million this year, and will make $26 million in 24, 5, 6, and 7. He's 31 years old right now, so they have done it, and we'll see if they end up paying him the price on the back end of it. But right now, they remain a contender, and if they could cash for a World Series, it would be great. I would say that their pitching has been the bigger part of it. For me, that's what it comes down to. And the vibe that I'm getting is I don't think there's any way he signs anything that goes into his 30s.
Do you think that he'll even take a contract that would buy out 1 or 2 years of age? I feel like if anything, if he's going to give up any leverage, it's all or nothing because his value one of the things that makes him such a valuable free agent when he's a free agent is his age. He's 27. If he were to give up 2 years of that and get 120 million guaranteed or whatever, but the Royals buy out 2 years at 29, that the odds of him getting that irresponsibly stupid contract from another team goes way down.
That's a great question. So if you're the Kansas City Royals, often criticized by people like me and you for not being transactional, then any deal that you give him cannot make him harder to trade. And so is he easier to trade with 2 years of arbitration left for the club that's acquiring him or with something that is 5, 10, 15, 20 million over what the arbitration cost would be? Because that's what you're giving him. You've got to give him more now than he's going to make going through the process to get him to give you those free agent years. So would you do that? I think if you look at him and you go, listen, I'm 50-50, like 50-100 is on the way. I'm just being ridiculous to make a point here. If you're like, he's got even more left in the tank, he's going to go way beyond this, then yeah, you can do it because you can always trade that, right? Like that's one of the things I've been talking to a number of different people, and it's like, look, you can sign a guy to a deal, and as long if it's a decent deal, if it's good for both sides, it's tradable. If it's bad for the club, you can't trade it.
Right.
And deals like that, let's be honest. I mean, I mentioned the Joey Votto deal is a big part of the problem for the Reds, right? Like he has not been the player. Now, he was older, but he has not been the player that they signed, and that's really handcuffed him. And it's almost a damned if you do, damned if you don't, because they're good enough that they make you, decent to where you pick 13, 14, 15. You never bottom out and pick 1, 2, 3 where the real elite premium talent is. So then you've got to be exceptional in your drafting or exceptional in Latin America to be able to make up for what they're doing. They almost – the quality of player harms your ability to put the talent around him that they need. And I think the other thing is, when you made the statement, I think last week or the week before, I'm not saying sign everybody, but sign this one guy. I mean, that's Mike Sweeney-ish. And I think, and I don't mean it like that Mike's contract was a bad one. It wasn't. Mike Sweeney was tremendous. Then he got hurt, but that happens. And if that's the only guy you got signed, who else is going to sign on and come here? And why would he sign if he thinks he's going to be the only guy? That's the
Well, I
other
think
thing.
that to me, that's the bigger issue. Is like, we're talking about this purely from, how much money can he make? But it may just be he looks at this franchise right now. He wasn't in an organization when they went to the World Series 2 years in a row. Like, all he was drafted, second overall because the Royals were terrible in 2018, and ever since he joined the organization, even when he was in the minors, they've been a bad team. He may just, if he doesn't have the ultimate faith in the front office to turn things around, he's like, I don't want to be the guy who's a great player on a terrible team and be like Mike Trout and never win a playoff game in my career, even though I'm considered one of the greatest players who ever lived. I think that's the bigger issue here than what you're talking about. Because the contract, if the contract is a good contract for the team, it's tradable. If it's a bad contract for the team, you know what? You can pay down some of that contract and move him. I mean, we're talking about that with Salvador Perez. Salvador Perez's contract, I wouldn't say it's a good contract for the team right now. The good years are over. It's not that the overall contract was bad, but it's time to pay the piper. You're getting the expensive years at the end of the contract when the player's in decline. But so Salvador Perez's contract is not an asset for the team, but if they pay it down, they can make it an asset. And so that part of it, I'm not worried about. I think if you have a player if Bobby Witt is the player you think he is, you can absolutely trade the player if you want to. The money is a secondary detail because you can always pick up some of that if it means getting more talent in return.
He is currently just is on base to 320. For the rest of the year, like on one of the fantasy sites, they don't project him to have that kind of on base because he has more of his career where he didn't. But they project him to basically end up being 30 and 50 at age 23.
He is already reaching, like I've been tracking.
The 50 is not, we can't comp that back to Eric Davis 27 and 70 and Ricky Henderson's because you weren't limited to 2 throwovers.
Right. No, the era is different. Stolen bases are up, but there's more power. So certainly if you adjust for era, no, if you adjust for era, I don't know if we'll ever see what we see with what we saw from Eric Davis for that brief window in 86 and 87, which unfortunately he wasn't healthy the whole time. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Eric Davis, go look up his numbers. And I believe he had a 1 year stretch, Eric Davis, where he had, oh man, it's like 97 steals and 40 bombs in the span of 162 games,
right,
between mid 86 and mid 87. There's a reason why, even though Eric just didn't have a Hall of Fame career come close, those of us who grew up in that era still put him up there with some of the most talented players who ever lived. But Bobby Witt's combination of home runs and steals, when you consider that he's a shortstop, we are starting to reach elite territory. Bill James has a creation known as the power speed number. It's a simple equation. You take home runs and steals, and it gives you what we call in math the harmonic mean of the two. So if you have 30 homers and 30 steals, your power speed number is exactly 30. But if you have 20 homers and 40 steals, the average is 30, but the power speed numbers will be lower than 30. You want to keep those numbers close together, right? So the point is, it's a way to combine home runs and steals into one number to give you an idea of what this guy can do in both categories. If you have 100 home runs and 1 steal, your power speed number is going to be like 2. You need to have both. And Bobby Witt, I believe, is already now 3rd in Royals history, behind only 2 Carlos Beltran seasons in power speed number. He's at 24 homers and I believe 37 steals, unless he's got one today and I haven't noticed. He just hit his 25th home run. Well, there you go. So, okay, we're moving up the list here. The Royals are still losing to the juggernaut that is the Oakland A's. But okay, Bobby Witt has hit another home run. So his contract, by the way, just went up like $2 million while you and I have been talking.
What's happening.
But when you look at shortstops in Major League history, Alex Rodriguez in 1998 stands alone. He was a 40-40 player at shortstop that year. 42 homers, 46 steals. It is possible, especially if Bobby hits the homers, because that's the number that's lower right now. If he can get his home runs up, it is possible he will end up with the second highest power speed number by a shortstop in the history of baseball. Like, there's only been, I hate, 2 or 3 30-30 seasons from a shortstop. Barry Larkin, I believe, did it once. Bobby Witt, I mean, 5 more home runs between now and the end of the season, and he's there.
I
So
remember if
we are.
Alfonso Soriano was still at second base. If you're talking
I
about
think he was a second baseman. As shortstops go, I think it's just A-Rod and Larkin. I could be forgetting somebody.
Yeah.
Alfonso Soriano got to not Alfonso. Sorry, Hanley Ramirez had 29 homers and 51 steals. So he didn't get the 30-30, but like essentially we're talking about 30 and 50. That's probably the only other guy who's reached that territory.
By the way, I will let you know we're proudly brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, serving the greater Kansas City metro area. They are nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Parking lot problems are not a problem if you know Gann. I've been making those parking lot issues disappear since 1994. Why risk accidents and liability in your parking lot if you own a business, if you manage a business? I'll get your parking lot restriped today. Brightly striped lots cut down on accidents. Keep your parking lot as safe as possible. Don't forget the weather's going to be turning. I know it doesn't feel like it. It's like 150 degrees in Kansas City, but it will be turning here in the next month or so. So they're booking up fast at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. Get it done right now. Go to GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Listen, Barry Bonds to your 30 and 50. When his 30-50 season he was age 25.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in, do I think he's going to hit 73 home runs? I don't. But do I think he can be 40-40? Certainly in this day and age, if you can get to the 40 home runs, the steals are now easier. It'll happen earlier. But it is, the fact that he's getting on base and playing defense at short, listen, nobody's going to question how good he looks in a uniform. It's just a matter of, can you make it fit for the Kansas City Royals? And I know you wanted to have one nice, positive show, as you put it, Rany, but do you realistically think there is a scenario where what the Royals will pay and what he will accept will actually be the right thing to do for building the best baseball team?
I mean, ultimately it comes down to what is the number that he will accept, right? And I don't know the psychology of Bobby Witt himself, like you said, his dad, his agents. But, when I look at like a Bryce Harper who, was a free agent and people were talking about him getting to $500,000, or they got 13 and 330. Let's look at some of the contracts that went out this offseason. I mean, Carlos Correa's contract was obviously affected by his failing multiple physicals, but Trey Turner, who is kind of an interesting comp for Bobby Witt, and
somebody had that.
Now he was 2 years older. That's the big thing. He was 29 at free agency, right? But what did he got? He got 11 years and I think 300 million. So there is this kind of, I don't want to say a hard stop at 300, but Trout I think may have gotten. Did Trout get 350 guaranteed? I probably should know this. I mean, it is only
he got more than that.
Was it 400 he ultimately got to?
Yeah.
I mean, it was also like 14 years. But at least this winter, even with, there were several, it was 12 years and 426 million. Okay. So yeah, I mean, Mike Trout is singular, but Mike Trout, and again, the analytics matter because the sport is run, so many teams are run by, smart organizations. There's a difference between Bobby Witt, even what we're seeing Bobby Witt do now, and Mike Trout on March 20th, 2019, when he signed that contract, where he was basically the best player of his age in the history of baseball. I mean, guy was racking up 10-win seasons year after year after year. But Mike Trout at that point had a case to be made as the greatest young player in the history of the sport. And frankly, it saddens me that his health has not allowed him to show that the last couple of years. And that is also the risk with these players, is that they may develop health issues. But if 300 for Trey Turner is what Trey Turner got as a free agent, would Bobby Witt consider a contract that starts with the number 3 now, knowing, he might get 400. He might even get 450 if he goes to free agency in 4 years. But 300, like, ultimately the difference in your quality of life and the quality of life of your great grandchildren between getting a 300 million guaranteed and 450 is not so much that but you don't want to take the chance of getting 100 million or 50 million because of some sort of career-altering situation.
Said the old fart, who's closer to the end of his work than the beginning, and that's not this kid. Like you can't, that you
And
and
that's
I.
why I'm not accounting for his psychology. I don't know. So my point is, if he's the kind of person, but my point, I guess, is that I was very surprised Bryce Harper. I thought Bryce Harper would have rather taken a shorter contract for much more money per year and bet on himself. Like I thought Bryce Harper would have signed 3 years and 150 million because or 140 million, something like that, because the team probably would have given him a lot of money per year if they only had a 3 or 4 year commitment. I thought for sure he would rather do that than take it was 25 million a year. 25 million a year is, especially with inflation, like you mentioned, by the end of that contract, 25 million a year is not going to be a huge amount of money. And Bryce Harper was 26 or 20. He was one of the youngest free agents ever. So again, if people who talk about the psychology, we think we know these guys. I thought if anybody was going to bet on himself, it was going to be Bryce Harper, this brash, arrogant. You know what? Bryce Harper, turns out he wanted the security. His contract, shockingly at the time, does not have an opt-out. That's the other thing. If the Royals are going to do this, there cannot be an opt-out. The opt-out is the absolute worst decision for a team to do because it gives all the upside to the player and all the downside to the team. Bryce Harper doesn't have an opt-out in his deal. 13 years, 330, straight across the board. That's it.
Well,
my point is, I didn't think he would have taken that contract, so I don't know what Bobby Witt will take.
I get where you're going with Bryce Harper, but I know I'm the guy who said Bryce Harper's the cop because that's the guy that was out there, and I'm refreshing my memory here on exactly what his contract ended up being. But I do want to point out, like Bobby Witt's going like Bryce Harper. I mean, like I said, I did say Bryce Harper's the starting point. He's going to want inflation, and they're going to sell you that Bryce Harper's better, or that Bobby Witt Jr. is better than Bryce Harper. He had the one fantastic year.
It was a fantastic year
in 2015.
He's one of he was always like they're hard. It's almost like the Juan Soto thing where they're such different players that it's easy to find things Bobby Witt does better than Bryce Harper. But what Bryce Harper does better is hit, and that's kind of the most important thing.
That was the point I was making. Don't swallow the olive. 118 runs, led the league. 42 homers, led the league. 460 on base, led the league. 649 slug, led the league, and of course his OPS 1109. Led the league. He won the MVP that year. He played 153 games. Do you know how many times he played 150 games in his first, 6? I know you do because you're looking at it. His first 6 seasons. In his 7th season, his last year with Washington, he played 159 games. That was only the second time he played 150. His games played 139, 118, 100, 153, 147, 111. And then he was 159 when he left and went to the Phillies. And I think, he had been around. He's like, this game's hard. Like, I get hurt. Right? We're talking about going to Bobby Witt Jr. I mean, back when when Bryce Harper was 20 years old, in his second year, by the way, his second year was when he was 20, right? Not when he's 23, which is going to be something else that's in the mix. He would have never taken the deal he ultimately ended up taking. And by the way, he had to play that all the way to the end. And that's part of like who's out there. Is there someone to trade him? If somebody's like, we'll do whatever it takes for Bobby Witt Jr. and the Royals don't listen to, they're fools.
Well, yeah, that was sort of my point last week that got everyone up in arms. I'm not saying you will trade him for. This is not a Carlos Beltran at the deadline situation where it's like, we're moving him. It's just a matter of give us your best offer, but no matter how bad the best offer is, we're trading him. That's not the situation here. If you don't get an absolute Brinks truck of talent for Bobby Witt Jr., you don't trade him.
And I do like your point. And I think it's one that the Royals need to examine is front loading a deal. Like that is the way to get creative and get it done. I don't think there's any chance it's going to happen. I mean, baseball contracts, they have started to, they do front load them a little bit. Bryce Harper's is front loaded because it goes down at the back end. Some of these really long.
You are starting to see teams be creative about that because, and again, especially for a team that is still the one saving grace of being in a bad team in a rebuilding situation is you don't have a lot of contract obligations. It would be silly not to move some of those contract obligations up. And at the same time, the value of money in 2024 versus 2034 to Bobby Witt, I mean, inflation was 8% last year. It's coming down, but like you'd rather have money now than later. That might entice him more. You're getting not just guaranteed money, you're getting the money now as opposed to going to free agency in 4 years and then getting money then. So yes, I think the Royals, that is a tool they absolutely should use. And if they're afraid to use it or unwilling to, that makes me concerned that John Sherman's not willing to spend money to put together a winning team's payroll.
Well, and I think the question is, are you putting together a winning team by splashing a ton of money with Bobby Witt Jr.? I can give you compelling statistics that say you're not.
I think there's a point at which, I'm not writing a blank check, right? There's a point at which the contract is a bad idea. But at the same time, if I say trade him, you're gonna have lots of people up in arms, right? So I think the one thing we can both agree on is that the nature of the stadium situation is such that a trade this winter is almost certainly not going to happen. It would be it would blow my mind, and it probably in a good way, depending on the return, right? Like the absolute worst thing is they shock both of us by trading him, and they don't get a lot of talent in return. I can't imagine that would happen. But
I do want to hit, by the way, we're brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete. You can find them online right now at GannAsphalt.com. No commissions, free consultations, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. Gann Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer, helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Go to GannAsphalt.com. I want to hit a couple things that were in the chat room there because, that people were throwing around. JJ Picollo. I mean, why would you even trust him to trade him? Was what was the gist of what one of the comments were.
mm-hmm.
Ways back.
I've heard a lot of that this week.
Well, I mean, the deadline was not a success for the Kansas City Royals.
I mean, I think that what fans are saying is this kind of trade would be the biggest decision the Royals have made since the Will Myers trade, for sure, right? And maybe even more than that. And that based on his overall body of work, that they don't trust JJ Picollo to make that trade. I think it's a valid point. The response I would have is, if you don't trust JJ Picollo to make that move, then he should not be the general manager. If he's the general manager, he has to be empowered to make that move. And if he screws that up, then he has to go. But this is the dilemma the Royals are in. It's where it's like you have a general manager that a lot of people don't trust to make the most important moves that the franchise can make.
And that's my point. His track record is 4.5 inches long. Like everyone, what Dayton Moore did is being thrown at the feet of JJ Picollo. I will ask again, what in his track record has been so horrible when it comes to making trades?
When it comes to trades, so far, I haven't seen. I mean, but how many trades has he really made? He's made a bunch of trades at this deadline. In 2 months is just such a small sample size. None of us can really evaluate that. The one that's got the longest track record is the Aroldis Chapman for Cole Reagans, and that looks phenomenal so far. But even that one, 2 months. I mean, Cole Reagans, especially if he keeps throwing 98, terrifies me that his elbow is going to come. He's going to have a third Tommy John surgery at some point. So we don't know yet. We just don't know. That's the bottom line. My concern with him is more the free agent track record. That's where I have more issues. But the trade record that JJ has, there's no blemishes on it. There's just not a lot of home runs either.
Mark says he wasn't with Dayton Moore for 15 years. He was, yes, but not making the decisions. That's the dumbest response ever.
I don't know if it's dumb. Like
I think it's dumb, and I will stand by that statement, because to say that he inherits who he came up with, that's ridiculous. They fired that guy for a reason, and they kept this guy for a reason.
I will say this. I don't know if you saw this.
It's not because he's exactly like that guy.
I don't know if you saw the quote in the Kansas City Star. Oh, my phone went out. I had the quote here, and my phone died. From John Sherman.
That's the upset of the day. You don't have a charger.
Oh no, I do, and I didn't realize that the battery. The upset is that I didn't realize my battery was dying in the first place. Otherwise, I would have charged it. But it was a quote in today or yesterday's Kansas City Star. They interviewed John Sherman, and there was sort of a comment to the effect of, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here, but maybe we didn't realize where we were in terms of the quality of the team. And that was a veiled swipe at Dayton Moore, but it was a swipe at Dayton Moore, I think. And I mean, ultimately, The argument I've said this before. The best argument you can make for JJ Picollo, remaining in this job after this disaster season is that Dayton Moore was the source. It's that a 6-year waste of a rebuilding project is entirely on the shoulders of Dayton Moore. And that might be true. Right. And what's interesting is that hearing that from the owner is like, well, maybe that is the owner's impression of what's happened. Because if I'm the owner and I see my team losing on pace to lose 110 games after 5 years of rebuilding, I want to know who the hell's responsible for it. He seems to think it was in fact Dayton Moore, and if Dayton Moore was single-handedly responsible for it, that really, really takes the shine off of the two pennants and one world championship. But that does seem to be their position.
That's not fair. I mean, it doesn't take the shine off them. They're there. Flags fly forever.
Okay, fine. All right. Nothing will take the shine off, but it definitely takes the shine off of his tenure as a whole.
It validates how long it took to get there and what it's been since. It absolutely does.
It doesn't validate how long it takes to get there because no other team takes 7 years to build.
That's what I'm saying. It validated it. Like it took too long is what I'm saying. I'm in agreement with you. Like the before and after that, I'll call it a 5-year window, 13 through 17, because they were contending all 5 of those years. How long it took to get into contention was too long, and how bad it's been since is too bad. And whether there was a change in philosophy or he got lucky, if you want to believe in luck, I don't believe in luck. I think there were good decisions made to winning. There were bad decisions made as to why it took so long, and there were bad decisions made coming out of it. I just know that, listen, I've had enough conversations with JJ Picollo and enough conversations with Dayton Moore to tell you they're not the same guy, and they do not view things the same way. And, we're not going to get into it tonight because we're 58 minutes into the conversation. We'll just roll it back. At some point, we're going to get into what went wrong. But I think John Sherman, I think the front office of the Kansas City Royals, if you could have true serum them, would have bet the under on this ball.
I think they would, although it was interesting to hear Sherman's quote kind of acknowledging that no, actually they didn't think they would be this bad. And I'm glad to hear that because, I didn't think they'd be this bad. And like, I'd like to think that I know a little bit about the sport, and I think that a lot of people were blindsided. Yes, maybe they didn't think they would contend. Maybe my dreams of, if everything goes right, they'll be a contender. Although in this division, frankly, if even some things went right, you're a contender. But I'm glad to know that they were blindsided by just how bad they were. I think there is something to be said for the fact that JJ was his consigliere for 15 years. Like, what we're essentially saying is he was a completely ineffectual consigliere. That's like the defense of JJ Picollo, is that sure, he was the right-hand man, but he actually had no power, right? In which case, well, then why was he hired in the first place? But he is his own man. And of course, this winter, we're going to see if they make as many, as many dramatic changes as, that I think they need to make. But one of those has to be some sort of resolution with Bobby Witt, and I just worry that we're going to be back here in April and he's going to be on his pre-arbitration contract. He's going to be under contract for the next 4 years, but nothing will have changed, and his value is just going to slowly leak away.
But I don't think his value slowly leaks away. If he's good enough for you to give him the contract you're talking about, his value is not going to leak away.
I think that 4 years is more valuable than 3. I will say the next year is not really that critical. I think next winter, because 3 years versus 2, there's a big difference in terms of value. So I think we can table this. I mean, if they make a move this winter, preferably as an extension, but a trade or whatever, great. But if not, I don't think that's a huge mistake by any means. But I think next winter you have to, at some point, you have to fish and cut bait. And I really feel like next winter, and they're gonna have some clarity in the next year as to where they are too, right? Or at least they claim this is an evaluation year. Great. I'm assuming next year is an evaluation. At some point, you've done enough evaluating. It's time to actually make some decisions. And I think next year they have to make some decisions.
I feel confident that MJ Melendez keeps running out there because they're giving him the same whole year that they gave Bobby Witt. It's just not going well. Right?
It's gone a lot better since the All-Star break. And that's the thing. There are some good things. We'll talk about that in maybe next week. It's mucking up. It's making things less clear. But
Yes.
we are seeing some good things,
Yes.
which makes us think, well, geez, they're gonna have to run some of these guys back next year because we just need to get some real answers. So that's at least with Bobby Witt, I think we have some of those answers this year. We don't have to wait till next year.
I would agree, but a 695 OPS and 12 home runs for MJ Melendez is not good enough. Now it's getting better. Let's see what he does down the rest of the way. My point is they stuck with Bobby Witt when we were early in the year talking about moving him to center field, and the defensive metrics were a little better. And you put him out there, and now they look like geniuses, right? And with MJ Melendez, I do get a sense that this is truly an evaluation year, and they will make some decisions on guys. And I don't think if MJ Melendez doesn't play a lot better, that MJ Melendez is just given right field. I don't think that happens. I think there'll be a different approach. But I mean, that remains to be seen. All right. Remember, we're brought to you, by GAN Asphalt and Concrete, full service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, nationally recognized, fixing parking lot problems since 1994. That's almost 30 years, people. Don't risk problems in your parking lot. It can be fixed so easy just with a phone call to GAN Asphalt and Concrete, 816-484-3338. You can find them online at ganasphalt.com. Maybe we'll get to what went wrong with the Royals in 23 next year. We've had it up there. We'll keep putting it up there, but if something bigger comes along, we'll jump on it. We will certainly see you next time out. For Rany Jazayerli, I'm Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman Corner.